My name is Taylor Mackenzie. I am 27, and my family proved exactly who mattered to them on the day I graduated. That morning, my diploma arrived in the mail. I propped the envelope on the kitchen table and told myself there would at least be a small dinner later, maybe a cake, and one quick photo of me in my gown. Nothing huge, just a moment that said they were proud. Instead, my parents got dressed up and rushed out without even glancing at the table. Nobody mentioned my ceremony. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with photos from a private room at a Texas barbecue restaurant. Balloons on the wall, a custom cake, relatives crowded around, and my dropout sister in the center of every frame. The banner was for her. The toasts were for her. I was not invited. I was not mentioned. While they were clapping for her, I sat on my bed with my gown half-zipped, staring at my silent phone and that envelope in the next room. When the party finally wrapped up, my dad called. He did not say, "Congratulations." He told me that with or without a degree, I was still the disappointment in the family and that my sister was the one who really mattered. I thanked him for finally saying it out loud. That was 5 years ago. Yesterday, I put my plan into motion, and today my phone is full of messages from the same people begging me to pick up. Before I tell you what he said, and what happened after I walked out, tell me, what time is it for you right now, and where are you watching from? I'm curious to see how far this story will travel. The day itself only made sense later. I woke up before my alarm, staring at the ceiling with that tight feeling in my chest that I always get before something big. Graduation was supposed to be one of those milestones people frame photos of and hang in hallways. In my head, I kept replaying the version where my parents insisted on taking a picture by the front door, where they argued over who got to hold the camera first, where my name actually mattered. Instead, the house felt like a hotel lobby the morning after a conference. My parents moved through the kitchen like they were on a schedule I had not been told about. My mom was already in full makeup, hair done, scrolling her phone between checking the oven and the freezer. My dad wore a collared shirt I only ever saw when we went somewhere nicer than usual. They were overdressed for just another day, but every time I tried to read their faces, they looked past me. I poured coffee and asked if either of them wanted to watch part of the virtual ceremony with me later. My mom said she had errands. My dad muttered something about being busy in the afternoon. Neither of them looked up long enough to meet my eyes. There was no, "We're proud of you," no talk about where we might go afterward. They just moved around me, opening cabinets, closing drawers, checking the clock. My sister wandered in halfway through the morning, still in pajamas, hair up, acting like it was any normal weekend. She grabbed something from the fridge, leaned on the counter, and smirked when she saw me in my plain black gown hanging on the back of a chair. She did not say congratulations. She did not mention the ceremony. She just asked if I was going anywhere later and then laughed when I said I had not heard of any plans. At some point, they all disappeared on me in pieces. My dad left first, keys in hand, calling something over his shoulder about needing to get across town before lunch. My mom followed with a big tote bag and a quick note about meeting someone. My sister slipped out last, taking extra time in the hallway mirror, adjusting her outfit, walking past me like I was part of the furniture. The front door clicked shut, and the house felt quieter than it had in years. The actual graduation stream on my laptop felt like watching somebody else's life. I heard my name come through the speakers, saw it flash across the screen in a list that moved too quickly, and there was nobody behind me saying, "That's you." When the video ended, there was no shout from the kitchen, no surprise cake, no "come here for a picture." Just the hum of the fridge and the curtains shifting in the air from the vent. My phone buzzed here and there with messages from relatives and a couple of friends. They sent the usual lines about being proud of me, asking how the ceremony went, dropping heart emojis and cap and gown stickers. Underneath the congratulations, though, I started to notice a different pattern. People asked if I was already on my way. Someone said they hoped the food was good. Another mentioned traffic on the highway near one specific exit across town. None of them said the name of a restaurant, but every clue lined up like puzzle pieces that I was not supposed to notice. I realized my parents had left dressed for something special. I realized my sister had left the house with the kind of makeup she saves for big nights. My relatives were talking about a celebration, and nobody had included me in any part of organizing it. I sat on the couch with my laptop still open on the coffee table, the graduation page frozen on the last slide, and scrolled through those messages over and over. The longer I read, the more obvious it became that there was another event happening that day. Something with tables and food and plans and my family in the middle of it, and I was not part of it. The day I crossed a finish line they said they cared about, they were somewhere else acting like my work was a background detail in their schedule. Keeping my robe draped over the chair, I walked slowly through each room, touching the backs of chairs and the edges of picture frames just to give my hands something to do. Every surface in that house held some reminder of a smaller occasion they once celebrated loudly. But that afternoon, the only proof my graduation existed was a silent screen and a string of messages from people who assumed I was already sitting at a table I had never been invited to. Evening did not feel any different from afternoon until the lights started to change. The sun slid across the living room and then disappeared, leaving the walls dull gray. My laptop screen had gone dark, the ceremony tab still open underneath, frozen on the list of names that had already moved past mine. I sat there with the gown folded beside me and the envelope on the table, wondering why the day felt smaller than it was supposed to. My phone lay face down on the arm of the couch. I could feel it buzz every so often. Short vibrations that meant more messages and notifications, more proof that the rest of my family was somewhere else. I let each one pass without picking the phone up. Part of me wanted to believe there was still some surprise waiting, something I had not been told yet. Another part already knew that if I were part of whatever they were doing, I would not be sitting alone in a quiet house. When I finally flipped the phone over, the screen was crowded with alerts from group threads and relatives. There were emojis, exclamation marks, brief lines about how much fun everyone was having and how someone really deserved today. Nobody asked where I was. Nobody said they were saving me a seat. The way they wrote made it clear that, as far as they were concerned, the right people were already together in one room and I was not there. Reading those messages, I started seeing more than that afternoon. I saw late nights at the kitchen table finishing assignments while my sister slept in because she had figured out school was not for her. I saw weekend shifts to cover books and fees while she floated from idea to idea, always needing a little more help. Every time our parents told me I was the reliable one, it had sounded like respect. That evening, it felt more like a convenient label for the person you can lean on and still ignore. Outside, cars came and went on the street. Neighbors pulled into driveways, brought in bags from the trunk, called their kids inside. Windows lit up one by one as the sky darkened. I walked into the kitchen and turned on the light over the sink. The envelope with my diploma sat exactly where I had left it that morning. Next to it, my student ID and the printed program for the graduation stream looked like props from a ceremony that belonged to somebody else. I tapped my fingers against the counter, trying to decide whether opening that envelope would change anything about the way this day already felt. For a moment, I thought about leaving, not permanently, just long enough to avoid the instant where my family walked back in pretending this had been a normal day. I imagined taking the envelope and the gown, driving to a friend's apartment, and letting their parents fill the silence with the kind of casual praise mine never seemed to have time for. Even in my imagination, that scene felt borrowed. It did not fix the fact that the people who were supposed to show up for me had chosen not to. When my dad's name finally lit up the screen, it did not surprise me. I was more surprised by how steady my hands felt when I picked up. The call did not last long. He did not ask how the ceremony went or whether I had managed to celebrate at all. Instead, he talked about how families have to be realistic, about how some people have potential that does not show up on a transcript, about how there are kids who chase grades and kids who take risks. He never said directly which kind he thought I was, but he did not need to. Every example he gave pointed in the same direction. The one who had walked away from school, according to him, had something special. The one who had stayed and finished, according to him, had done nothing more than meet basic expectations. He framed it like a simple fact, not an insult, which somehow made each word land harder. By the time I ended the call, my ears were ringing even though he had never raised his voice. I set the phone down next to the unopened envelope and stared at both for a long moment. The room looked exactly the same as it had that morning, but something in me was not. Whatever story I had been telling myself about this being a misunderstanding did not survive that conversation. Graduation was no longer just a milestone. It was the point where the hierarchy inside our family finally stopped being subtle. The next week, small details started lining up in ways I could not ignore. Bills and statements had always been background noise in our house. Envelopes piled up on the counter, then vanished into a folder my dad kept in his office. I knew roughly what utilities cost because I grew up hearing complaints about them, but I never really studied the numbers. After graduation day, that changed. It felt like someone had taken the filter off, and every line with my name on it suddenly came into focus. I started with my own bank account, mostly to keep from replaying that phone call in my head. I opened the app, expecting the usual list: rent, groceries, a couple of small online orders. Mixed in with those were charges that did not belong to my life, a streaming service I did not use, a phone bill that did not match my plan, a payment to the company that handled utilities for my parents' house. The longer I stared at the screen, the less accidental it looked. The same company names appeared every month, sometimes on the same day, always pulling from my account like it was just another part of the household system. When I clicked into one of the payments, my own information was set as the primary contact: my email, my card number. Somewhere between semesters and part-time shifts, my details had turned into the default for more than just my own expenses. Curiosity turned into something sharper. I pulled out a folder where I kept pay stubs and tax forms and laid everything across my bed. With a notebook beside me, I went back through months of transactions, writing down every charge that felt out of place. 2 columns formed without me planning it. One for the life I actually lived, one for the life my family had attached to my account. The second column grew faster. My email filled in the gaps. There were welcome messages and renewal notices for services I barely remembered agreeing to. Some dated back to the year I moved home after losing a campus job, when my parents told me not to worry because we would handle things together. Back then, I had been relieved to hear that. Looking at those messages now, the word "together" felt inaccurate. Scrolling social media finished what the bank statements started. A photo from the party I had not been invited to popped up in my feed, tagged by a relative who assumed I had been there. In the comments, between compliments on the decorations and jokes about barbecue sauce, someone wrote that my family always found a way to help my sister whenever she hit a rough patch. Another replied that at least they had one kid who could be counted on. No names, no tags, but the roles were obvious. I stepped away from the screen and stood in the doorway of my room, trying to line memory up with evidence. I remembered handing my mom my card, just this once, to cover a past due bill she said she would take care of. I remembered my dad asking me to set up automatic payments because I was better with computers. None of it had felt wrong in the moment. It had felt like being the adult child who could handle logistics. Seeing the totals pulled out of my account month after month, it felt less like helping and more like being quietly drafted. When my phone buzzed again, it was a message from a cousin asking if things were okay at home. She added that my mom had once told her it was only fair that I picked up more of the financial slack because I was responsible, and my sister was still finding her path. Reading that line made my stomach drop. Fair, in that sentence, did not sound anything like equal. I went back to the notebook and wrote that sentence at the top of a fresh page. Under it, I listed every time I could remember covering something that was not really mine. Gas for a car I did not drive, fees for classes I did not take, deposits for apartments I never stayed in. Each item on its own looked small enough to dismiss. Stacked together, they felt like proof. By the time I stopped, my bed was covered in papers and my notebook was half full. The envelope with my diploma sat on the corner of my desk, still sealed, while I traced years of decisions that had turned my future into a safety net for everyone else. For the first time, the imbalance in our family was not just a feeling I could be talked out of. It had amounts, dates, and confirmation emails that did not care about anyone's excuses. By the time I finished sorting through those papers, I knew I could not keep pretending the way money worked in our house was normal. The notebook stayed open on my bed all night. Every time I tried to fall asleep, the columns I had drawn earlier lined up in my head. What actually belonged to me on one side, what I had paid for, that never touched my life, on the other. If graduation day had looked even a little bit like support, I might have kept calling it help and left those numbers buried. Morning sounded exactly like every other day there. Cabinets opened and closed. The coffee maker clicked on. The local news hummed from the living room. My parents had built a routine around the assumption that I would slide back into my old role without saying anything. That idea sat in my chest like a weight while I got dressed and picked up the notebook again. I did not plan a speech. I carried the notebook into the kitchen and set it down on the table where everyone dropped their keys. My mom glanced at it and went back to her mug. My dad did not look up from his tablet. My sister sat with her feet on the chair, scrolling through her phone. I stood there until the silence felt deliberate, then opened the notebook to the pages covered in figures. When I said I needed to go over some charges on my account, my mom's confusion sounded practiced. She squinted at the pages as if those company names belonged to strangers. My dad leaned back like this was an overreaction he expected me to grow out of. My sister watched the way she watches reality shows, waiting to see if someone would finally snap. I pointed out payments for utilities tied to this house, subscriptions registered under my email, transfers that matched days they had asked me to help out. For each example, there was a memory. A weekend shift I picked up to cover a bill, an elective I dropped because I was afraid of stretching my budget. None of that seemed to land. My dad said it was natural for families to share resources. My mom asked why I was acting like this was a business arrangement. My sister rolled her eyes when I mentioned totals. The more I laid it out, the less it felt like a misunderstanding. I kept my voice steady, but inside I could feel years of quiet adjustments pushing up against every sentence. I was not asking for anyone to pay me back on the spot. I was asking them to admit that this had been more than a little help, that they had leaned on me while telling me it was simply what a responsible child does. Their answers did not change when the numbers got bigger. My mom said I was being dramatic. My dad said this was not how family worked, that family did not keep score. My sister finally spoke long enough to remark that at least I could afford it. In a few sentences, they turned a notebook full of statements into proof, in their minds, that I was selfish for wanting boundaries. Standing there with my graduation envelope still unopened on the counter, it hit me that I was never going to get what I was asking for. I was not going to get an apology or even a straightforward acknowledgement that this arrangement had benefited them more than it benefited me. If I stayed, I knew exactly what would happen. More charges that were not mine, more expectations I had not agreed to, more reminders that my work was background noise to whatever crisis my sister was living through. I closed the notebook and took it back to my room. The decision formed quietly in the space that followed. I did not slam doors or raise my voice. I pulled two suitcases from under my bed and started folding clothes into them. The room that had always felt temporary while I finished school suddenly looked like a place I needed to leave for good. Packing forced me to decide what actually belonged to me. Textbooks and notes went into a box. Clothes and a few personal things went into the suitcases. Everything else stayed where it was, not because it meant nothing, but because I had accepted that I could not fix what it represented. There was no version of staying that did not require me to shrink myself back into the person they preferred. When I was done, I set the notebook on top of one suitcase and the sealed envelope on the other. The papers inside that envelope were supposed to be proof that I had options. In that moment, they felt more like permission to stop letting my future function as the family's backup plan. 2 days later, I moved my suitcases to the front door before anyone was awake. The house was still, the kind of quiet that used to feel safe when I was younger. Now it felt like I was walking through a place that had already decided what my role would always be. I left the notebook on my desk. It was there if anyone wanted to read it, but I did not expect them to. The argument about what was fair was already over. All that was left was whether I would keep accepting it. Carrying the suitcases down the stairs felt heavier than dragging them out of storage. It felt like admitting that nothing I had done so far had been enough to change the way they saw me. My mom stepped into the hallway just as I reached the bottom. She held a coffee mug like it was any other morning. When she noticed the bags, her expression tightened. She asked where I was going, as if leaving needed permission. I said I had somewhere else to stay. She wanted to know how long I would be gone and whether I could still help with certain payments. I told her I would cover my own and nothing more. My dad stood in the kitchen by the table, tablet in front of him. He reminded me of every time they had helped when money was tight, listing moments from years ago like items on a receipt. When he finished, he waited for me to drop the suitcases and apologize. Instead, I picked up the envelope with my diploma, slid it into my bag, and said I would handle things on my own. My sister watched from the doorway near the garage, one shoulder against the wall. She did not try to stop me. She said I was making a big deal out of nothing, that nobody had forced me to put my card on anything. The comment landed the way it was meant to, as proof that the people who had benefited most from my help did not see it as a cost at all. I did not answer her. There was nothing left to explain. Once I closed the front door behind me, the air felt different. The street was the same, but for the first time in years, I was not leaving with the expectation that I would come back and fix whatever needed fixing. I drove to a small apartment across town where a friend had cleared a corner of the living room for me. It was cramped and temporary, but it felt more honest than the house I had grown up in. The first thing I did after dropping my bags was open my laptop. I logged into every account I could think of: bank, phone, utilities, streaming services. Wherever my card appeared next to my parents' address, I removed it. For some, that meant turning off automatic payments. For others, it meant calling customer service, repeating that I no longer lived there and would not be responsible for future charges. It was slow, but watching my name come off those files felt like pulling my signature off a contract I had never agreed to sign. Messages from home started to arrive before I finished. My mom asked why a payment had failed. My dad demanded to know what I thought I was doing with the bills. My sister sent a screenshot of an error message and a complaint about losing access to something she needed. None of them asked where I was staying. All of them assumed I was supposed to keep everything running. I did not answer each message separately. I wrote one response and sent it to both of my parents. I told them I had removed my information from any account I had not explicitly agreed to take on, that I would be paying only for my own expenses from now on, and that if they tried to add my name or card anywhere without asking, I would dispute it. I did not add explanations about feelings or history. Every softer version of that line had already been ignored. That night, on an air mattress in the corner of a living room that did not belong to me, I listened to the hum of a different refrigerator and the traffic on a different street. My phone lit up again and again with new messages from home, most of them angry, some accusing, a few calling me ungrateful. I turned the sound off and placed the phone face down. Their crisis stayed on the other side of a screen instead of spilling into my plans. The fallout from their choices was finally starting to land where it belonged, and I was not stepping between them and the impact anymore. 5 years passed faster than I thought they would. At first, I kept expecting someone in my family to decide that what happened around my graduation had been too much. For a while, the distance almost looked like growth. Messages slowed after I stopped answering demands about bills. Calls came less often once it was clear I would not hand my card over again. Months went by without anyone showing up at my door. Life without them settled into something simple. I worked, paid my own rent, chose what to keep and what to cut, and knew where every payment went. When unexpected expenses came up, I adjusted. Every so often, the past tried to follow. A collection notice would arrive with my name tied to an old address, or an email would mention an account I did not remember opening. Each time, I pulled out the folder in the back of my closet and went through the same process. I explained that I no longer lived there, that I had never agreed to be responsible for those balances, that my details had been used without my consent. It took time, but the result was the same. The debt came off my record and shifted back toward the people who had actually created it. News about my family reached me in fragments. Someone mentioned that my parents had to move into a smaller place because they could not keep up with costs once outside help disappeared. Someone else said my sister was having trouble getting approved for leases because her credit report was full of late marks and accounts that had turned into bigger problems. You cannot build stability on someone else's sacrifice forever. The plan I put into motion yesterday was not a dramatic twist. It was the last step in a line of choices I had been making since the morning I carried my suitcases to the door. Over the years, I kept documentation of every attempt to pull my name back into their finances. Yesterday, another letter arrived from a company insisting I was still attached to a balance I had never touched. Instead of quietly fixing it and moving on, I filed a formal dispute, uploaded the file with everything I had kept, and sent a short notice to my parents stating that any future use of my information would be treated as fraud. On paper, it was just a few clicks. In practice, it shifted the weight off my shoulders. Within hours, my phone started buzzing the way it used to. My mom asked why I was trying to make things official. My dad warned that involving outside agencies would hurt the family. My sister insisted I was ruining her chance at starting over. None of them talked about what they had done to bring us here. They only focused on the part where I had stopped quietly absorbing the impact. I did not answer. I let the messages stack up. Later, I skimmed through them like old notes from a class I already passed. There were apologies mixed with accusations, lines about forgiveness next to comments that still implied I had overreacted. Under everything, the pattern stayed the same. They wanted me to carry the consequences of their choices and call it love. Blocking their numbers felt less like slamming a door and more like locking a gate that should have been closed years ago. I updated my phone settings, removed them from emergency contacts, and told the few relatives I still speak to not to forward anything about my parents' situation. Their lives will continue without my help, just like mine has continued without theirs. The difference now is that there is no open channel for them to drag me back into the role they preferred. Sitting alone in my own place, years after the day they celebrated a dropout instead of a graduation, I understood that the real turning point was never the party or the phone call. It was the moment I started treating my own choices with the same seriousness I had always given theirs. They chose who mattered to them. I chose not to fight for a spot in that order, only to stop standing between them and the results. If there is any lesson in this, it is not that cutting people off is easy or that it fixes everything. It is that boundaries are not punishments. They are lines that protect the parts of you no one else bothered to guard. Pretending nothing was wrong would have kept me small, broke, and useful to everyone but myself. If any part of this sounds familiar, I hope you hear at least that much. Thank you for staying with me through the story. If you want to share where you are watching from or how this landed for you, I will be reading the comments, even if I am done answering certain messages.